My name is Chris Schaefer. I'm the president of the Heritage Lake POA Board of Directors. This is the third in a series of videos to provide background on the issues before us with the current covenant petition. Hopefully, you've already seen the previous two videos, which were basically just an introduction to what this is all about and an explanation of what bylaws and covenants are and why they're important to us. In the third video here, I will talk about rules, bylaws, and covenant changes, how they're managed, and the voting rules to change them. The short answer to what the difference is between rule, bylaw, and covenant changes is this. Changes to the rules are requested by members or committees to the board, and the board votes on whether to approve them. Board controlled. Bylaw changes are usually requested by a board member and voted on by the board. Board controlled. Covenant changes may be requested by a member of the community, a committee, or a board member, and the request is investigated and worked by the board and the attorney to generate a ballot and take it to the community for vote. Community controlled. Only a yes vote by 2/3 of all lot owners can change a covenant. Now for the detail behind the answer. This is a bit longer. Rules in our community include general, lake, A&E, campground, bylaws, and covenants. Making changes to each of these rule types requires us to follow specific voting processes. Some are community rules and may not be legally binding. This means they don't require to be approved by legal counsel or filed with the county. Sometimes we still consult with our attorney to ensure we're not unintentionally violating any county ordinances or state laws. We have committees that take ownership of managing those rules which apply to their work the committee does. For example, the Lake Committee manages lake rules. When a committee wants to make changes to their rules, they define the change and present them to the board at an operations meeting. If the board agrees that the change is a good one, the board adds the rule change to the next board meeting agenda for discussion and vote. It can only be voted on at a board meeting because that's the only place that the board can officially vote on issues. Members of the community attending the meeting also may ask questions if they have any. If that discussion doesn't result in further answers being sought or disagreement of any of the elements of the request, the board will vote on whether to accept the change or not. If accepted, a motion is made by a board member, voted on, and the rules updated in the association rules and communicated to the membership. Typically, most rule changes are proposed towards the end of the year after evaluation of how things went and what may need to be changed. That also works from a timing perspective so that the new rule can make it into the next year's rule books. If the board votes no to a proposed rule change, the change does not get added to the rules. Duh, makes sense, right? Bylaw changes can be proposed and implemented only by the board. The board has sole authority to change the bylaws. Here's the 3-step process. Step 1. Proposed changes are presented to the board at an operations meeting. Step 2. If agreed by the board, the proposed bylaw change is then added to the next board meeting agenda where the change will be read, discussed, and a motion to accept will be made and voted upon. Most often, this will require 2 readings and 2 votes in consecutive board meetings. But exceptions are allowed if it is agreed by the board that not doing so would have a detrimental impact on the community or the board. Time sensitivity may be a consideration in that determination. Step 3. Once the changes are approved, they are signed by the POA board president and secretary, notarized, and sent to our attorney who then files it with the Putnam County. Bylaw changes are always reviewed by the POA attorney to ensure they don't violate our covenants, state laws, or county ordinances. The changes are legally binding. Making bylaw changes is not that complicated, but they are more complicated than rule changes, and that legal review is required. These 2 types of changes, rules and bylaws, may only be made through an official vote by the board of directors. The most complicated rules to change are our covenants. The biggest difference between covenant changes and bylaw and rule changes is that covenant changes require a 2/3 yes vote of the entire membership if the changes are to be made. That means if we have 3,000 lots at Heritage Lake, we would need 2,000 yes votes to make even a minor change. Each lot that a member owns represents a single vote. If you vote 3 lots, you get 3 votes. A if you own 3 lots, you get 3 votes. If you think this sounds reasonable, please keep in mind that since their creation over 40 years ago, these have not been changed once. Our covenants were written during a period of time when our community was being established. The developer's vision was 6 neighborhoods being sequentially constructed. Each time a neighborhood was ready for construction, the neighborhood covenants were filed. The developer envisioned a community having very strict views on what the architecture, infrastructure, and issues were at the time. We have been locked into that view for 40 years and we have virtually no ability to change it. This is the 5-step process we are forced to follow for covenant changes. Step 1. A member identifies a covenant that they feel needs updating and brings that request to the board at an operations meeting. The board discusses the request, identifies the specific section of the covenants to determine whether it makes sense to pursue a change to support the request. If agreed, it gets added to the next board meeting agenda. If it is determined that the change shouldn't or couldn't be made, it ends there. Step 2. A designated board member consults with the attorney to review the requested change, define and document the legal verbiage needed to the article and section, and researches any conflict or violation with existing local, county, or state statutes or laws. A new draft of the covenant is written to incorporate the changes, including any other sections of the document that may be impacted by that change. Additionally, a petition defining the changes to be voted upon is created by the board member and attorney, along with review of any other legally binding documentation or processes required to take the covenant change request to the community for official vote. The content of the petition is strictly defined to include the member name, lot number or numbers, the signature, their vote, yes or no, the date the ballot must be returned by, and also must include a copy of the changes and an explanation of the changes being requested. This process can take several months or even years. That's only step 2. Step 3. Once the required updates and documentation have been completed, it is reviewed by the board. If the board requests any modification to what's been done, it needs to go back to the attorney to ensure that the requested changes are allowed and the words used are correct. Step 4. Assuming the first 3 steps are completed and correct, the required documents are sent to each lot owner, including those who reside at the lake and those who don't. Every eligible voting member is sent their ballot in the mail. It is true, however, that if the contact information on file with the office is not correct, a member or members may not receive their ballot. That's why we often encourage lot owners to update their contact information with the office if what they've previously supplied has been changed. Often, in an effort to get petitions returned from those who hadn't responded before the deadline, a second or even third mailing will go to those who hadn't previously returned their ballots. This is a huge administrative effort and significant cost burden to the community. Counting and tabulating the ballots is completed by a designated member who acts in complete confidentiality with respect to the vote of individual members. They do, however, record which lots have been voted and the standing count of yes and no votes to help determine whether additional effort is needed to go after the votes not yet returned. Step 5. As previously stated, our covenants have never been changed after many efforts by the community over the years. If a covenant change did happen to pass, though, the next step would be to consult again with the attorney to provide evidence of the voting and ballot results, and the attorney would then file the updated covenants with the county. Covenants are legally binding. We have learned a lot over the years about how the process works and what things we struggle with. In response to those lessons, we have expanded ways we may now vote to include electronic voting. Electronic voting can take on many forms. Petitions may be returned via mail, fax, through a voting website, email attachment, and text photo of the completed ballot. Designated members of the community manage the petition distribution and handling of returned petitions. This ensures the integrity of the voting process is maintained. It is important to note that no member of the board will touch any petition once they're distributed or returned. This process is consistent with all ballot voting processes. That will not change in the future. The board of directors doesn't touch the ballot or return votes at any time. The board does request updates from those who do manage the petitions to understand how many have been received, How many are yes, how many are no, and how many may be invalid because they were incorrectly completed. We're excited to bring this community improved ways of voting, and we hope that this will encourage all of our members to vote this year. This will ensure that the future votes will reflect what the voting majority in this community wants. This is the third in a series of 8 videos created to help explain the Covenant campaign. I hope this helped you understand a little bit more about how these elements